All right, strap in, everyone. We are going deep today, like really deep into this Conor McGregor case.
Yeah.
And it's a wild one, I gotta say. We've got legal commentary, court testimonies, you name it, and we're going to try to make sense of it all, right? So this civil trial revolves around accusations of assault and rape against McGregor by Nikita Hahn. But what really twists things up is that this is civil, not criminal.
Right.
Huge difference there.
Huge difference. You've got it. In a criminal case, you've got to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a super high bar to clear, you know? But civil cases, different story. The standard is preponderance of the evidence. Basically, the jury just has to decide if it's more likely than not that McGregor's responsible for what Hahn says he did. Now, this doesn't mean jail time for McGregor.
Right.
But if the jury finds him liable, woof, that's going to be a hefty financial hit.
So no criminal charges, but a potential mountain of legal and financial trouble nonetheless.
Gotcha. So let's get into what each side is saying. Hahn alleges that McGregor violently raped her, leaving her with some pretty bad bruising. But then we've got this CCTV footage from the hotel showing Hahn with James Lawrence. He's one of McGregor's friends and also accused of assault. And they're not exactly acting like they just went through something traumatic. There's hugging, kissing, even some ear writing.
Yeah, that's something the defense is really focusing on, for sure. They're basically saying, look, Hahn's behavior so soon after the alleged assault doesn't add up, throws her whole story into question.
So how do Hahn's lawyers counter that? They're not denying the footage, are they?
Nope, not at all. Their argument hinges on the fact that Hahn says she straight up doesn't remember any of this with Lawrence. Blame it on the alcohol, the trauma of the alleged rape.
Right.
And of course, there's the diagnosis of severe PTSD. No, that's a whole other can of worms, isn't it? Like, how much weight can a jury give to someone saying they don't remember, especially when there's drinking involved?
Oh, it's tricky. It really is. Defense attorneys, they love these memory gaps, right? They plant those seeds of doubt in the jury's mind. It becomes this battle of he said, she said.
Yeah.
Jury's trying to piece together a timeline from these, often messed up memories. It's tough.
So aside from the memory issues in the footage, what else is the jury grappling with here? There's medical evidence, right? Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. The medical testimony was pretty powerful. Okay. We have a paramedic on record describing extensive bruising on Hahn. Then there's a doctor who confirms those injuries and also testifies about Hahn's PTSD. And not just that she has it, but how severely it's impacting her.
It's really a stark reminder, isn't it? That trauma, especially from sexual assault, isn't just about the physical injuries. It's those deep psychological scars that can stick around long after.
Absolutely. And, this case really brings up a bigger issue. So often, victims, especially if there's alcohol involved, they're met with skepticism. Doubt. Their memories are questioned, their actions are analyzed under a microscope, and their pain downplayed. It's not right.
It really makes you think about how we can better support victims, right? Create a system where they feel heard, even when going up against someone like McGregor.
Yeah.
But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's talk about McGregor's side. He's denying everything, isn't he?
Full denial. McGregor claims that everything with Hahn was consensual. He used words like vigorous, athletic to describe it. And he wasn't shy about going into graphic detail either.
That's a deliberate move, isn't it? Is that a common defense strategy?
Oh, it can be. By describing everything so confidently, in his own words, he might be trying to control the story, paint himself a certain way, like, I'm a confident guy, why would I need to force anything?
It's fascinating how much a person's demeanor in these cases can influence things. Do you think McGregor's fame, his whole fighter persona, played a role in the jury's thinking?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely a possibility. Cases like this, they blow up in the media. Social media goes nuts, and all that noise, it can create bias, whether we realize it or not. It's a big challenge for juries to stay focused just on the facts presented in court.
Yeah, for sure. So on one hand, you've got Hahn claiming this violent assault. And on the other, you've got McGregor saying he was consensual, even enthusiastic.
Right.
Classic he said, she said, which is where Danielle Key comes in. She went to the hotel with Hahn that night and says she saw at least some of what happened. What's her story?
Key's testimony is interesting, I'll give you that, because it kind of supports both sides in a way. On one hand, she says she didn't see Hahn in any distress, that everything seemed quote-unquote fine, which, goes against Hahn's claims. But here's the twist. Key also says Hahn told her about the alleged rape not long after it supposedly happened.
Wow. So her saying Hahn confided in her soon after could actually back up Hahn's story?
Right.
But then she also says she didn't see any signs of distress. The jury had a lot to untangle.
Oh, absolutely. You hit it right on the head. These cases often come down to who the jury believes more. They're not there to perfectly reconstruct what happened. They have to decide based on what they hear. Is it more likely than not that the assault happened?
Okay, so after all that, what did the jury decide? Did they buy Han's accusations or did they go with McGregor's version?
Well, after everything, the jury came back with their verdict, and it was a pretty big win for Nikita Han. They sided with her and awarded her, wait for it, €248,000 in damages.
Whoa, that's a serious chunk of change. So does that mean they fully believed Han's story?
The money definitely suggests they lean towards her account, no doubt.
Yep.
But before we jump to conclusions, let's break down that award a bit because there's some interesting stuff hidden in there. So out of that 248,000, €60,000 was for what they call general damages,
Okay.
which covers things like pain and suffering, the emotional impact.
Right.
Right. The rest, 188,000, that's for special damages. More concrete stuff.
Like what?
Medical expenses, lost wages, that kind of thing.
Makes sense. So they acknowledged, the mental and emotional toll on Han, but most of the money is for her actual tangible losses.
Exactly. Now, here's where it gets interesting. They could have awarded what are called aggravated or punitive damages, but they didn't.
What are those?
Well, aggravated damages, those are meant to compensate for extra harm caused by, really outrageous conduct.
Oh.
And punitive damages, those are meant to straight up punish the defendant and make an example of them, deter others. But the jury chose not to go there.
So they believed Han enough to award her a big chunk of money, but not enough to say McGregor was exceptionally malicious.
That's how it seems. Yeah, it's another layer of complexity in this whole crazy case.
Totally. Before we get to any final takeaways, though, what about some of the other testimony? There were other people involved, right?
Oh, absolutely. We can't forget about Han's manager from the hair salon, Brennan. Her testimony was pretty important. She said Han called her that night, the night of the alleged assault, super upset, saying McGregor had raped her. Brennan even saw bruising on Han's arm later that night.
Wow. So that supports Han's claim that she told someone right away, even if you didn't go to the police.
Exactly. Sometimes victims are in shock, trying to wrap their heads around what happened before they decide what to do.
Makes sense. And this kind of ties into what Detective Sergeant John Ryan talked about, right?
Yeah, he talked about how Han was hesitant to press charges at first. It really sheds light on how hard it is for victims to decide whether to report. There's fear, emotional turmoil, the whole world knowing your business. It's tough.
It's a good reminder that justice is different for everyone, especially for survivors. Speaking of different perspectives, what about James Lawrence? McGregor's friend, who was also at the hotel. He had that separate assault allegation, but the jury found him not liable.
Yeah.
What was his side of the story?
Lawrence basically said he and Han had consensual sex twice that night, even specified that he used condoms both times. And he's adamant that he didn't see Han upset or anything, said everything seemed totally normal.
So it's Han's word against his set.
Pretty much. And the jury had to sift through all that, weigh everyone's credibility.
Yeah.
In a civil trial, you don't need proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but you still need to be convinced based on the evidence.
And this case really shows how hard it can be to get to the truth, right? Especially with memory issues, strong emotions, and powerful people involved.
Oh, for sure. And don't forget about social media and the whole public opinion thing. It adds a whole other layer of pressure.
Right. This case was everywhere. Everyone had an opinion. That can't be easy on anyone involved, especially the jury.
Yeah, you need the jury to be impartial. That's why there was that whole thing with someone supposedly taking pictures of them. The judge had to step in.
It's scary to think that people might try to intimidate a jury.
Yeah, you got to protect the legal process, make sure it's fair. But before we wrap up, there's one piece of testimony I keep thinking about. The doctor who examined Han the day after at the sexual assault treatment unit.
Oh, yeah. What about him?
Well, he talked about how bad her injuries were, said it was one of the worst cases he'd seen in his entire career.
That's powerful coming from someone who's seen it all.
Right. And he also addressed that whole thing about the tampon.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Han claimed the assault was so violent it pushed a tampon she was wearing further inside her.
Exactly. And this doctor basically said, medically speaking, that's possible.
So his expertise kind of backed up Han's story.
Yep. Made it harder to just dismiss her claims.
Okay, so we've got all this conflicting testimony, the emotion, the memory stuff, the whole 9 yards. And the jury had to figure out if Han proved her case. What was the standard again?
Balance of probabilities. Meaning, is it more likely than not that McGregor and Lawrence assaulted Han?
Right. Lower standard than a criminal trial, but still a big decision.
For sure. And ultimately, they sided with Han But, and this is a big but, there's a twist.
Oh, what's that?
While they found McGregor liable and awarded that huge sum, they cleared James Lawrence. They said he wasn't liable for assault.
Wow. So they believed Hahn about McGregor, but not about Lawrence.
That's the thing with these cases. You have to look at the evidence against each person separately. And in this case, the jury drew two different conclusions.
It really makes you think, you've got this seemingly clear-cut victory for Hahn, but then you dig deeper and it's way more complicated.
Exactly. It just goes to show these cases aren't black and white. There's so much nuance, so many factors at play. Memory, trauma, public perception, power dynamics. It's a lot to unpack.
And this case, it's not just about what happened that night. It raises bigger questions about how we treat victims, how we handle these kinds of accusations, and how we navigate truth and justice when things get messy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And maybe, just maybe, by having these conversations, by acknowledging the complexities, we can start to create a system that's more just, more compassionate, and more understanding for everyone involved.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like on the surface, it's a win for Hahn.
Yeah.
She got the jury on her side, and they hit McGregor hard with that payout.
Oh, yeah.
But the deeper you go, it's anything but simple.
Right.
Conflicting stories, memory gaps, McGregor's fame, all that swirling around. It's hard to imagine any jury could be 100% certain about what happened that night.
That's the thing with these cases, especially when you throw in all the emotion, the media frenzy. It's not always about finding some perfect truth. It's more about looking at the evidence and figuring out what's the most likely scenario.
And those expert witnesses, they really tip the scales, don't they? The doctors who testified their words carried a lot of weight. They made it much harder for the defense to just brush Hahn's claims aside.
Totally. Experts can explain things the average person might not understand, especially with trauma, memory, how assault can affect someone long-term. They connect the dots,
Absolutely. In this case, it also shows just how much pressure and scrutiny victims face when they come forward. Hahn not wanting to go to the police at first, people dissecting her every move, questioning her memory.
Yeah.
It's rough. It makes you realize how hard it is for survivors to get justice.
It's a sad reality. A lot of victims feel silenced, like no one believes them, especially when they're up against someone rich and powerful. We have to do better, create a system where victims feel safe, supported, and heard.
Couldn't agree more. But for now, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. How does this deep dive change the way you view these kinds of cases? The McGregor case, it's a tangled mess of memory, consent, and trying to find justice in a world where public opinion often takes over. We might not get all the answers, and that's okay.
Sometimes that's just how it is. There is no easy answer. But hopefully, by talking about it, by understanding how complicated it all is, we can start to do better, be more compassionate, more understanding, and strive for a system that's truly fair for everyone.